Thank you so much. What a great honor it is for me to address this distinguished crowd. You're so successful, you're so eminent in the business world, but I have to tell you, you're not the most successful CEOs. The most successful CEO in this room is Rabbi Bookman. How many people could do what he's done? The way he operates his business plan is remarkable. He discovers these brilliant, fantastic young men and their beautiful and brilliant and amazing young wives, sends them to obscure parts of the city and the state, gives them a pittance to start with, nothing to start with, and tells them, you're on your own. Make your own money, raise it, create a great Chabad house, and they do it. It's better than McDonald's. It's better than any of these companies. It's absolutely remarkable. I have urged the Harvard Business School over the years to do a case study of Chabad. How it started and how it spread all over the world. The only disappointment I had is when I watched the film The Martian and they landed on Mars, they weren't greeted by a Chabad shaliach. Had there been a Jew in that astronauts program, believe me, there would have been a Chabad shaliach on the moon waiting for them. It is absolutely remarkable. The work you do with young people, the work you do in bringing stability to people in a world that is so unstable. I'll tell you a story about that in just a couple of minutes. But first, I want to say a few things about the honorees. This is an amazing group of honorees. Of course, I've known John for many years. There's nobody like John in the world. I'm on his radio show all the time. It's the one I have to worry about the most. Why? Because it's street talk from New York. No BS. Straight down to earth talk. He asks me the kinds of questions that you know New Yorkers on the subway are asking themselves. And we always have a terrific time talking to each other. I don't know the honorees. I've just met them tonight. I have to tell you, I'm so pleased there's a guy named Avi getting an honor because I was born with the name Avi. I was Avi until I was 18. And then my wonderful mother says, you know, Avi, you need a real name if you're going to college. So they picked Alan. And so I became Alan. But all my old friends still call me Avi. And you mentioned about rabbinical oratory or rabbinical style. I wasn't the best student in the world when I went to yeshiva. I went to yeshiva, Brooklyn Talmudical Academy, and the Rebbe called me in, Rabbi Zerach, Orthodox Rabbi, called me in at the end of my last year. He says, Dershowitz, you know, you got a good mouth on you, but a brain, not so much. He said, we got to figure out something. We talk a lot, but you don't have to think a lot. He said, I have two suggestions. One, you could be a lawyer. Or second, he said, you could be a conservative rabbi. Well, I wasn't smart enough to be a rabbi. That was, by the way, an insult that he was expressing. He couldn't even say the word reform. But I couldn't be a rabbi, so I had to become a lawyer. But I wasn't a particularly good student, but I had one great memory of my years in high school. My best friend in high school was a guy my age named Tzvi Groner. I don't know if you know this story, but Tzvi Groner's uncle was the Rebbe's secretary, the new Rebbe. He had just been made the Lubavitch Rebbe. He was a young man. He was in his 30s, very handsome with a dark black beard. And one day, Tzvi and I went over, walked from our high school, which is very close to 770, and we sat down and had a bag lunch. And Rabbi Groner asked us some questions, and then suddenly this man walked in. And it was as if, you know, the lights in the room went on. It was the Lubavitch Rebbe, as a very young man. And he stopped me and he says, what black Gemara are you learning? What page in the Talmud are you learning? And I told him it was Baba Kama, and he started asking me questions. He was giving me a bechina, a test. And remarkably, I passed it. Just happened to pick a page and a verse that I knew something about. So I passed my first test. It was my first meeting, but not my last meeting, with one of the greatest men in the history of the world, the Lubavitch Rebbe. And it had a big impact on my life. And I have continued to work closely with Chabad over many, many, many years. The second time I really met and worked closely with Chabad was in the 1970s, when I was deeply involved in defending Soviet Jewry and trying to bring about an end to the Soviet Union and trying to get 1 million, maybe even more than 1 million Jews out of the Soviet Union. And the Rebbe and I met and we discussed the tactics for doing that. We had a little bit of disagreement. I wanted to involve myself in marches and protests and legislation, and the Rebbe said, let's do it quietly behind the scenes. And we had a long discussion, and finally the Rebbe said to me, look, you do it, what you have to do, I'll do what I have to do, and maybe together they will work. And it ended up in one of the greatest human rights successes in modern history. Millions of Soviet Jews, oppressed, discriminated against, imprisoned, were allowed to leave and went to Israel and the United States. And in Israel, they are a startup nation. They're the ones who created the new Israeli economy, that turned the Israeli economy from oranges to apple, and from an agrarian economy to one of the greatest high-tech economies in the world, largely as the result of Soviet innovation. So I had that experience with the Rebbe. Then my third experience, then I had another experience. I introduced Arthur Goldberg, who was running for governor of New York. And his running mate was a very distinguished man named Basil Patterson, whose son graces us here today. And so I worked very closely with Arthur and Basil, traveling the country, the world, around all over the state of New York, trying to campaign, unfortunately unsuccessfully. But I introduced Arthur Goldberg to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave him a blessing. He, of course, never took political sides on any issues, but that was my third. But then the most important encounter I had with Chabad was a young man. He had to be maybe 25. And his beautiful young wife, 23, 24 maybe, came to my office at Harvard. Already it was a remarkable scene. I don't remember ever before seeing a Chabad guy with a long beard and, the uniform, coming to Harvard Law School, knocking on my door. He says, Professor Dershowitz, can I have a minute of your time? Sure, sure. He says, everybody has rebuffed me. Why have they rebuffed you? He says, I want to start Chabad, Lubavitch, at Harvard University. And they all laugh at me. They say, Harvard is a place of secular, intellectual, Brahmin, successful people. You want to bring the Lubavitch from Crown Heights in Brooklyn to Harvard? The dean said it's crazy. The president said it's crazy. The faculty said it's crazy. I said it's a great idea. It's a great idea, as long as you understand what your role is. And your role is not to try to be smarter than the professors. Sometimes rabbis at Hillel make that mistake. They're not going to learn philosophy from you. They're not going to learn literature from you. Harvard has the greatest professors in the world. You have to give them something they don't have. You don't appeal necessarily up here, you got to appeal here. You got to appeal to their neshama, to their heart, to their soul. You got to give them a sense of pride and attachment to their heritage, which they don't get in the classes. Long story short, Chabad started at Harvard. I was the first faculty advisor. We now have Chabad houses at virtually every major university in the United States of America. It is remarkable. And the kids come. The last time I went to Harvard, I go and speak every year to Chabad. They have a Friday night Shabbat dinner. 600 students showed up. By the way, not all Jewish. The vast majority of them Jewish, but they bring their friends. They bring their friends because they understand the spirit. The one great thing about Chabad, they're not judgmental. I have gone to Chabad dinners. I remember one of the first Chabad dinners I went to, the guy sitting next to me was a young kid named Jared Kushner. We became friends as a result of Chabad. But on the other side of Jared Kushner, who went to an Orthodox school, you might find a guy with tattoos, with his motorcycle parked outside, with a ring through his ears and nose, and he feels a spiritual vacuum. And he comes to Chabad, and nobody sits in judgment. Nobody asks him how he's getting home after Shabbat. Nobody asks him whether he's going to shul tomorrow morning. They make everything available. You get to do whatever you want, but nobody makes you do anything. In fact, I was on a television interview the other day with Israel, the one you mentioned, And I said, why are Jews in America, secular Jews, non-Jews, why are we so supportive of Chabad here in America? And why in Israel do you find that there is such a sharp separation in many instances between the secular and the religious? And I said, the reason is our First Amendment. Our First Amendment separates church, state, mosque, and synagogue. So the Lubavitch have no state involvement. They can't make me or you do anything. There's no such thing as a chief rabbi in the United States who has legal authority the way they have it in Israel. In Israel, there's too much of a mixture between the synagogue and the state. Too much of a mixture between the chief rabbinate and secular people. And secular people resent it when they're told they can't drive on Shabbat, or they can't go to a movie theater, or they can't go to a soccer game. It's none of the state's business to tell them what to do. The answer is that America is the most religious country in modern history. The most religious, modern, Western country. More people go to synagogue, to church, to mosques than in any other Western country in the world, precisely because we have separation of religion and state. And in Israel, although there's a growing religious minority, still the vast majority of the country is not only secular, but has some antagonism. So it's a very strong lesson for how the First Amendment is not only good for the secular aspects of society, it's good for religion. Who do you think invented separation of church and state? It was a man named Roger Williams, a minister from Rhode Island, who said you need to separate church from state, otherwise the wilderness of the state will begin to encroach on the garden of the church. He separated from church and state to support, to help, to support the church. And Chabad knows this, and they sure they have the biggest menorah, and sure they get individual members of government to light the menorah, but they don't make everybody like the menorah. It's there for people to see. It's a part of showing our pride at being Americans and Jewish, and there's no inconsistency. We don't have dual loyalties any more than any other group in the country has multiple loyalties. We're a country of multiple loyalties because we're a mosaic, a quilt. The strength of America is that we have so many different elements, so many different religions, so many different ethnicities. And Chabad is one of the major representatives of Jewish faith and Jewish religion in America. So what has Chabad done on campuses? It's remarkable at a time when we see increasing pressure on Jews and supporters of Israel to assimilate and not to be Zionists and not to stand up for Israel. Chabad has become the strongest pro-Israel force, pro-Jewish force on college campuses around the United States just at the time when it was needed. More so today, I hate to say this because I'm also on the board of Hillel, more so than Hillels around the country, because in Hillels there's conflict. There's open Hillel, there's closed Hillel, there's people in Hillel who support Israel, there's people in Hillel who oppose Israel. The Chabad, it just shows a love for humanity and a love for people. And the support for Israel among Chabad has been amazing. And the remarkable thing about Chabad is it does things that are very provocative in the sense of supporting Israel on campuses where there's a lot of opposition to Israel. And Chabad is not controversial. Somehow it has managed not to be a lightning rod, but to be a protector. It doesn't create controversy on campuses. It brings people together. You have sometimes Palestinian kids who are very pro-Palestine, sometimes very anti-Israel, will come to a Chabad event just because they want to see how a different culture operates. We've had exchanges where we go to Ramadan dinners and they come to our dinners, and it really helps to build bridges on university campuses. So, you know, we live in the best of times, and we live in the most dangerous of times, best of times. Look around. Has there ever been a more successful Jewish community in history than the American Jewish community? You do polls, people admire Jews, people admire their success. There is anti-Semitism, but it's diminishing, certainly diminishing from the time when I was in college and law school. This is a little bragging. I told you how bad a student I was, so to make this point, I have to tell you how good a student I became. So I went to Yale Law School, and I was first in my class. I was editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal, which is the highest honor you can achieve, and I was going to be a Supreme Court law clerk. That's like being the #1 draft choice in the NBA. I applied to 32 Wall Street law firms and got turned down by every single one of them. I knew how Jackie Robinson felt, because I grew up in Brooklyn, and Jackie Robinson was the greatest ball player around, and it took him until he was 26, 27 years old to be able to break into the major leagues. So I understood what anti-Semitism was like. It doesn't exist. My son graduated Yale Law School 25 years later. Every law firm in the country wanted him. Today, every major law firm's senior partners, managing partners, are all Jewish. Sullivan and Cromwell turned me down, and now they call it Solomon and Kronstein. It's still Sullivan and Cromwell, but it's so dominantly Jewish. Its managing partner is a chassid. They have kosher kitchens. They have minions. They pause at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to daven mincha. Can you imagine Sullivan and Cromwell turning over their graves? And Bath and Swain and Moore and all these guys? So that kind of anti-Semitism is ended. What we have is something even worse. What we have is, on college campuses today, people using anti-Zionism as a pretext for anti-Semitism. Just last night, my dear friend Erwin Cutler, who used to be the Minister of Justice of Canada and the Attorney General of Canada, one of the greatest human rights fighters in the world today, he represented everybody, from Sharansky to Sakharov. He tried to help get Wallenberg. And he's just an amazing human rights guy. He spoke at McGill University. He was honored. He got an honorary degree. And they tried to shut him down. They tried not to allow him to speak. And just today I saw a video of that, and then I saw a video of Parliament, the Canadian Parliament, where unanimously they rejected that approach and praised Erwin Cutler. So, we have people on our side. This is not a battle that we're going to lose. This is a battle, however, that we have to fight. People ask me all the time on the issue of Israel, are you a pessimist or are you an optimist? In Israel it's simple. They say a pessimist is somebody who says, oh, things are so bad they can't possibly get any worse. An optimist says, yes, they can. I'm not that kind of an optimist. I do think that things can get worse. We are in great times. Things are very good today. But if you look at the history of the Jewish people, good times too often have been followed by bad times. The Golden Age in Spain, the Weimar Republic. What could have been better than the Weimar Republic, where Jews became so important in every profession, in the legal profession, in the music profession, the acting profession, in the business profession. And within years, Hitler comes to power. Israel gets established, and immediately it's attacked by all of its surrounding neighbors. So being a Jew means you can never be a complete optimist. You can never say it's over. What our sources say, B'chol Dor V'Dor, in every generation, they come after us. We have so many prayers that reflect and represent the fact that we are the most discriminated minority in the history of the world. We're doing well. We're doing well. But we have to keep our guard up. And Chabad keeps up our guard. It keeps up our guard in so many different ways, physically and intellectually, but morally and spiritually. And you can't fight enemies unless you have the spiritual source behind you. And the spiritual source that Chabad gives, it energizes people, and it helps people have the resources and the wherewithal to fight back. I would say today that Lubavitch is probably the single most important Jewish organization in the world. It may be one of the most successful organizations in the world without regard to the Jewish qualification. It is absolutely remarkable. I just cannot stop praising what goes on. Every city I go to in the United States, they say, oh, you have an Orthodox synagogue, a Reform synagogue, conservative, and of course we have Chabad. I just came from Charleston, South Carolina, where my wife's family is from. Chabad. And it's very, very successful. Chabad schools. They have Chabad day schools in cities that hadn't had day schools now for many, many years. And they attract not only Chabad kids, obviously, but they attract Orthodox kids, conservative kids, secular kids, kids with no real affiliation. So again, it's just, and why is it successful? It's successful because of folks like you. I'm looking around the room. I don't see a lot of Chabad people in this room. Chabad could never succeed if it just relied on its own community. It has to rely on folks like you, folks who live secular lives for the most part, but people of all religions and all backgrounds and all races who understand the virtue of Chabad. And I think that's so important. Look, I hate to say this, but history has shown that Jews need disproportionate power and influence to survive. We're often criticized. Oh, we have too much power. AIPAC is the second or third most important lobby in Washington. I always respond to that by saying it should be the first. It shouldn't be the second or the third, because Israel needs that kind of support. Chabad on campus should be the most prominent, because it has to fight back. The tragedy is that the best source of peace in the world is a strong Jewish nation and strong Jewish people. Why has Israel not been attacked for so many years? Because it now is qualitatively superior militarily to all of its surrounding enemies. If it weren't an economic superpower and a military superpower, and now a diplomatic superpower, despite its being condemned at the UN all the time, it would be vulnerable. And when Jews are vulnerable, they are attacked. So the best way to defend in anticipation is to make sure that our institutions are strong. If you need a biblical source for it, just go back to the Psalms, which says, Hashem oz li'amo yitain. God will give the Jewish people oz, strength. Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. Only then will the Jewish people have peace. Peace comes through strength. Never, ever be ashamed or embarrassed about using the wealth you've accumulated. You made it by the sweat of your brow. Nobody gave it to you. The people in this room are the ideal American dream. You have been successful, whether you come from a Greek-American family, an Italian-American family, an African-American family, a Jewish-American family. You've made it. You've made it because you worked hard and you lived the American dream. And don't let anybody ever make you feel guilty for using what you've earned to help your people, to help peace, and to help all the people. So in the last analysis, I'm an optimist, and I'm an optimist in the real sense. And why am I an optimist? In large part because I know that Chabad will always be there for us. Thank you all very much, and keep contributing.